Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. I'm your host this week, Charles Max Wood, and I am here with Carmine Paolino. And you said you're from Italy, from southern Italy. I always get excited when I have Italians on because I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and I'm like, oh, all the good memories. Anyway, and the good memories of the good food and good people. Anyway, but yeah, you live in Berlin, and you wrote the RubyLLM gem. I'm sure there's a lot more to know about you. What else should people know and go, oh, Carmine is so cool?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here. So I started using technology when I was really, really young. So at the age of 5, I started to write my first batch scripts to automate launching my favorite games. And that moment of making a computer do exactly what I wanted felt like magic. So that sparked a lifelong fascination with technology. And at the moment, I am building like AI tools. I'm building Chat with Work, which is this retrieval augmented generation app that you can connect to your Google Drive and Slack and Notion accounts, and essentially chat with all your documents, just as if ChatGPT or Claude would know anything about them. I also co-founded Freshflow, which is also an AI-based startup that helps supermarkets reduce food waste and maximize their profits. And yeah, I've done a bunch of things. Essentially, I graduated in computer science from University of Bologna, then did my master in AI from Free University of Amsterdam. And then I've been a data scientist ever since. But I think relevant to this podcast is that my last project at the University of Bologna, which was for Internet and Web Technologies, was actually in Ruby. And the story goes that, it was supposed to be in PHP. And at the time, mind you, at the time,
I like you already.
It's a great story because I was already looking at Hacker News, and at the time, all my team, we were 4 people. They all knew PHP, and I didn't, right? But I followed Hacker News, and I saw Ruby on Rails, and this was, if I remember correctly, was 2010. So the era, right? And I was like so intrigued by Ruby on Rails at the time that I convinced my entire team to switch to Ruby on Rails. And we all had so much fun that actually some of us went to work for other companies that use Ruby on Rails. In fact, one of my friends went to work for SoundCloud here in Berlin. I even thought about doing that. I even went through the application, but then I thought, hey, I want to have a master degree and, maybe look at something else as well. And that's where I started looking at AI. And I was a data scientist for many years. Whenever I could do anything that was related to the web, it was Ruby on Rails anyway. But mostly Python, mostly machine learning engineering, trying to scale also systems. So between, the DevOps to the modeling level, right? So it was kind of a full stack, let's say, machine learning person for a long time. And then, I decided to go back a little bit to academia. So I went to the Alan Turing Institute in the UK, mostly helping out with an organization called Data Science for Social Good. And then I received a call from Entrepreneur First, and they told me like, hey, you have a profile of a potential founder. And I was like, really? Because that was my dream, and I never thought I could do that. So I went for it, and then I founded Freshflow. And now I'm actually doing my own thing. I'm a solopreneur, and I'm building Chat with Work. And so to connect back to RubyLLM, since now I'm completely free and I'm doing, like a web app essentially, it was obviously done in Ruby on Rails. And at the time, and maybe I'm jumping too far, but at the time I wanted to...
No, I'm digging it because...
It's all connected. I was searching for like libraries for building Chat with Work, and I saw some of the libraries out there, and I wasn't so satisfied with them, so I decided to build my own.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting kind of getting into that a bit, and some of this reflects, with my own background, right? I was kind of a solopreneur. I had a couple of virtual assistants, but I mostly just, ran things myself with the podcast network for, I don't know, like 8 years. And, I built most of the software that the podcasts run on, and, just on and on and on and on. I'm not going to get into kind of the emotional wreckage that I went through the last few years, especially with, now I'm in a full-time job, and I love the people I work with and I love the projects I work on, but there's just something about working on your own thing and having it, come together in that way. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
I really identify with a lot of what you're talking about.
Awesome.
But yeah, I wanted to jump in and just start talking about RubyLLM. And I know that the AI space and the LLM space is pretty hot right now. And that's one of the things that I've been wanting to put together for a while is, specifically, you said, hey, you can get in, you can chat with your Dropbox or your Google Drive or whatever. And for me, I want the same thing, but I want to be able to do it with my podcasts, right? It's like, hey, change the host out, right? So like on JavaScript Jabber, we just had somebody, he's like, hey, I've got to take some time away, and right. So things like that, he's the last guy that's one of the originals besides me. Right. So chat with it about that, or, hey, how's the traffic look? Or, publish this episode on this date instead of that date, and that kind of a thing. And so, I got excited about it. And then the local meetup, the last 3 months, have all had presentations on how to, through APIs, hit LLM endpoints, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd been playing with some of that, and we've had Obi Fernandez on to talk about Ray, and so I got everything hooked up and was figuring all that stuff out. Ray is RAIX for the people who are listening and trying to go find it. And he talked about it before, but I found that the documentation didn't give me clear direction on how to get everything together the way I wanted. And he kind of implies that you can stream the response back, but he basically says it's in my book. And I have the book, and I went and looked in the book, and I got lost. So, but I did have a fundamental thing working to do the presentation at the meetup last night. And I was doing a chat bot, and I just hooked it up to openweathermap.org. And so it was just, but then I was showing him, look, you don't just ask it, hey, what's the weather? Here's the latitude and longitude. But I put in, is it a good time right now to go have a picnic? And right, it came back and said, the weather is right. So it figured out my cities at this latitude and longitude, and right. And this is the power of the AI, right? Is that it's smart enough to figure out some of the context. And I'm being really long-winded, and I'm sorry. But anyway, what happened was, for some reason, the Open Router gem, it was working Tuesday night. And then Wednesday morning, when I was fiddling with it, it just wouldn't connect. And it was giving me a 404 error. Of course, the error also said that my JWT token was wrong, but I was just using an API key. And so I think something must have changed on their end, or there was something funky going on between me and them, because it worked fine one day and was broken the next. I'm like, I really want to show those guys something working. And then I was like, but I'm talking to Carmine tomorrow. And so I just went and grabbed it. And within an hour and a half, I had the exact same thing working. And so anyway, this is cool stuff. Cool gem. Anyway, so I'm just curious. I mean, have you had any other people come to you and basically say, this stuff is great, save my bacon? I don't know. What's been your feedback on RubyLLM?
It has been absolutely overwhelmingly positive. I couldn't have imagined how good this would have been. So when I released the gem, I was sitting on it for 2 weeks, and on 0.1.0 pre 49 or something like that, right? I did release a lot of pre-release versions for myself, and I thought, hey, maybe I should release it right now instead of waiting until I get everything done with Chat with Work and doing it, let's say, the DHH way, where you release it after Basecamp, right? That was my original plan. I was like, well, what can go wrong? And so I released it, and I made some Reddit posts, and immediately in 2 days we got to 260 stars.
Wow.
And my goal was to get to 300. So already kind of achieved my goal in no time at all. And then someone posted it on Hacker News. And I remember that night, I was playing in a club. So I'm also a DJ on my free time. And I come back home, I go to sleep, and around like 6 a.m. in the morning, I get so many notifications of Discord, which for some reason I could hear. I didn't like mute my computer. And I go and check, and people were saying like, "Oh my God, you made it to front page of Hacker News. How amazing." And in 1 week, we got to 1.7 thousand stars.
Wow.
Which was absolutely overwhelming. Yeah. So the reception has been fantastic. I've made new friends. There's some people that I talk to now kind of regularly. I have an audience on Twitter, which I didn't really have before. So it has been absolutely fantastic. Just mostly, I would say 99.999%, everything has been super positive.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah. I have to say, my feedback is that it's really simple to use. I think a lot of people get worried that, it's AI and I have to know all these things. And no, you just tell it, I want to chat. You have to do a little bit of setup so that it knows how to connect to OpenAI or something. But that was, for me at least, literally, here's my API key. Go crazy. So.
Great. Yeah, that was exactly the type of design that I wanted to have. So basically, the reason why I made RubyLLM is because when I looked at the other libraries, they essentially fit in 2 different categories, right? So you have the libraries that are mostly done by Alex Rudall. Shout out to him. He's a great guy.
His library is amazing. It does everything.
Yes, exactly. So his library his main library is Ruby OpenAI, right? And then he has also the Anthropic Gem. Right. They are lightweight layers on top of the HTTP calls, right? So what that means is that it's really easy to support every single function from the LLMs, but it's also really hard to then switch between different LLMs.
Because you have to switch the
and
gem.
One
and
of my use cases for chat with work. Exactly. And all of the response objects, right? They're all different. So when I was designing chat with work, I wanted to have something that could make it easy to switch between models. And I was thinking either mid-conversation as a North Star. And so I needed to have something that was a unified interface. So I looked at the other type of libraries, so like LangChain RB specifically. And I saw that I wanted to have some other features. The design wasn't exactly what I would have done for a library. But I implemented it. But then I wanted to have the pricing information, the model information, and listing of the models. So I started modifying it, and I started to go into the code of LangChain. And it is quite a big gem. It's not a small gem. It has a lot of code.
Yeah.
So already, it was quite difficult to orient yourself around. And it is quite... I want to say it's a little over-engineered for my taste, right?
Okay.
But I started modifying it, and also it depends on the Alex's gems, right? So in order to have that same feature, I need to modify the Anthropic gem, then also LangChain, and also LangChain RB Rails, right? Because there's a separate gem for the Rails integration. I was like, is this really what I want? Also, I noticed other things that I didn't like about it, which is that it put the providers first. And I think philosophically speaking, we don't really care about providers, right? People care about models. Where do they come from? Maybe it's interesting in terms of pricing, but if you want to just chat with a model, you want to just go like RubyLLM.chat model and just go with it, right? And I think that's the beauty and why people have been finding RubyLLM so interesting.
So one question I have on that
RubyLLM
point
puts
real
the
quick.
models first. Yeah.
One question I have on that real quick is, so initially, like I said, I was using OpenRouter, and OpenRouter, it kind of does you can switch models on their service, right? So you can pick them, but you don't have to set up all the different service providers. So why not go with something like that?
That's a good question. Well, the OpenRouter basically locks you into their environment.
That
right?
is true.
So you need to use OpenRouter. What if OpenRouter dies?
Or
right?
it gives
what
you
if
404
other
errors
providers
randomly, like I
come
talked
along?
about my little story.
Or it gives you 404 errors, right? Exactly. So I didn't want to be locked into anything. I wanted to use truly open source software, just like Ruby and Rails are. And that's why I decided, you know what, this is probably a good idea to do. And yeah, there were other reasons actually why I thought that the existing gems were not of my taste. So for example, streaming, even though like LangChain RB has a unified interface for most things, streaming is where it gets complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you get a chunk, you actually get a chunk that is exactly the object that is retrieved from the API itself. So you need to parse the chunks in a different way. If you have an Anthropic model, then you have an OpenAI model. And so all of these problems combined made it so that I wanted to build my own.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you did, because it's freaking awesome. So yeah, let's dive in a little bit. So you mentioned models, and if you get into like the getting started, I mean, I only hooked up OpenAI, but it sounds like you want people to be able to switch seamlessly. So if I put in an OpenAI key and an Anthropic key and one or two other providers, maybe a Gemini key, I can switch between those seamlessly.
That's right. And the way that this works is that RubyLLM essentially has two different parts of the code. So you have the clean interface with the user, right? So you have the chat object, you have the message object, you have the content object, et cetera. And then you have the messy part of the code, which is the provider code, right? And what the provider code does, I'm saying messy, but I think it's decent, but it has all the messy parts of actually communicating with the provider interfaces and translating between the RubyLLM internal representation and the provider representation. It sounds pretty straightforward, and so I implemented it that way so that you can have a very simple interface, but actually change between models, because then it's just a question of parsing and retrieving data and formatting it for their format. Not really about a specific representation that only works for that specific provider. I definitely didn't want to do that. And the way to achieve that was to essentially study the APIs from OpenAI and Anthropic, especially because that's where I started. And figure out what is the best way that they implement things, and how would I implement it in terms of the objects, the Ruby objects that I want to have in my library. And so I picked and choose, how to represent tool calls, for example, and that's how it's now represented in RubyLLM. And then if the other provider that doesn't represent it this way, will get a different format method in their modules in order to do that.
That's awesome. So one thing that I'm wondering about is, do the different models have different capabilities that you have to adjust for, or let people know, hey, you can do this with, I don't know, GPT and Anthropic, but not with Gemini or something like that?
That's right. Yeah, that's a great question. So I implemented a model registry. That's actually where this whole thing about RubyLLM started, right? When I wanted to implement the model registry for LangChain. And it basically has a bunch of different capabilities per each model. So, for example, it would know if a model has function support, if it would have JSON mode. Soon, when we will actually have structured output support, if it will have structured output support. What is the context length? What is the maximum amount of tokens for the output? And all that information is put together in a JSON file that we distribute directly with the library, because one of the design principles is to be a turnkey solution. So you just, as you did, like you installed it, you put your OpenAI key, and there you go. You have a chat interface if you want to, right? At least in the command line. And this is exactly the experience that I wanted to have, and I wanted people to have. So if there is a model that doesn't have, let's say, function calling support, we will throw an error, because we will know it from the models.json. And the way that at the moment we make the models.json is to query the APIs from the listing model APIs from OpenAI, from Anthropic, Gemini, etc., and then augment it with our own code that figures out, based on the model family, like, does this model family has function calling? Does this model family has JSON mode? What's the context length, et cetera, and you would find that in the code, in the capabilities.rb files, in the module, in the provided modules. Now, however, since I've grown a little bit tired of having to maintain that code, and have also just parsing the provider's web pages, which is actually kind of costly, especially when you do it with LLMs. And there is some code in RubyLLM to do that in the tasks. But I remember the last time I used it, I spent $20 just to parse all of the new OpenAI model pages. Well, since I've grown tired of doing that, I actually contacted an ex-employee of mine from FreshFlow, who now is also an entrepreneur, and he has a company called Parsera. And they're basically doing scraping of web pages using LLMs, and then they return that as data in JSON. And I thought that would have been the perfect use case in order to showcase their product, and we would get like an API for free in order to just query about the capabilities of any LLM in existence. Since unfortunately the providers, they don't provide that at the moment, right? Like when you get a list model endpoint response, you just have, most of the time, just the model ID and sometimes the capabilities. I think Google does this, and some other small things, but not the full model info object that we have inside RubyLLM. So basically what Parsera is now building, and they are like, I would not say 90% there, is this API that you can just, with a GET request, query, and you have a beautiful interface, a beautiful JSON object with all of the different capabilities, all the prices, all well formatted for all the major, 4 providers that we have in RubyLLM. And so I will scrap that code. I'm really excited when I remove code. So I will scrap that code and simply call that API from then on. So I'm really excited for that.
So you're not going to have a JSON in the gem anymore. It's going to be an API call, or the API call will generate the JSON.
Rather the second. Yeah, I still want to have the turnkey solution so that anybody that installs it, maybe doesn't have internet, I don't know, doesn't want to do that API call. Of course, they need to have internet. Then it can still actually have that installed, and without having an extra API call every time it needs to refresh models, for example.
Yep. So yeah, let's dive into what RubyLLM actually provides, because I think people can now kind of be comfortable
Right.
with, hey, look, it does all these models. It knows which models will do which things. And so if you try and do something with one model that it just doesn't, it's not compatible with the model, it'll tell you, and then you can do something different. So let's start with the
Right.
chat, because that's where I started. And I was just blown away that it was that easy, because you literally just do you instantiate a chat object, and then you do a .ask, and then you get content back and you can post it. And what I found was that I had to pull in the common mark gem and tell common mark to convert it to HTML, and I was set. That was like it. Is there
That's
anything
right.
more to
Yeah.
it? Am I missing it? I mean, we can get into tools in a minute, but
so in the chat, you can also specify content, right? So you can send an image with it. You can
Right.
send an audio file with it. You can send a PDF with it. And also there, I tried to make the design of the library feel super easy.
Yeah.
So that if you need to analyze an image, it's just a chat.ask what's in this image, comma, with, colon, open curly braces, image, and then the path to your image,
Right.
or the HTTP link to your image. And that also, I think, follows the same philosophy of RubyLLM of convention over configuration, and just trying to make people's life easier. Then you can also stream the responses in real time.
Right.
And you can simply use Ruby blocks to do that. So it's super simple. It's just a chat.ask, whatever you want to ask, do chunk, and then print chunk.content.
Yep. And
the chunk is a chunk object, and it looks like a message. In fact, if you look at the code, is pretty much exactly like a message. I think it just inherits from message, and that's it. It will, if you just print the contents, it will simply print that chunk. But then in the background, we're actually accumulating the response. And so the result of that chat.ask would actually be a fully blown message. And it will be also persisted in the background in the memory that RubyLLM.chat has about messages.
Yeah.
What are the capabilities that it have? So
hang on, I want to
it
talk
can
about
also generate images.
Because I mean,
right.
you have the capability, and it just does it in a do loop, and it has the chunk content, and it has like a print or puts in kind of your just general Ruby application. But and I don't know, people who listen to this show know that I'm totally in love with Turbo. It was like, where have you been all my life, Turbo? But you have examples on how to push the stuff out to Turbo as well.
Right.
So one question that I have with this, because it shows a job, and the job uses the Turbo Streams channel broadcast, right, to update the message, which is what you want. I'm trying to figure out exactly where this gets called from. Does it just run periodically and then I don't know?
How it works in Chat with Work is that there is a job. It's not called chat stream job. It's called slightly differently. But there is that job, similar to the job in the guides. And what it does is to stream via Turbo, essentially appending the chunk content to a div that is hidden. And then I use mark.js in order to doing the rendering of the actual message. The reason why I do this is because I used to have everything server side and do all of the rendering of Markdown server side and then send, the HTML over. But the problem is that when you get to really big messages, it's starting to stream every single time you have a new chunk, which may be even every single word, or even sometimes less than one word. You can imagine that refreshing the message so fast and doing it so many times, it actually bogs down your connection.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I noticed that my connection was downloading like multiple megabytes per second
Right.
of HTML. So it didn't make any sense to me. So what I'm doing is to simply append the chunk to that specific div, and then Marked will look at that div, and it would actually do the rendering in another div that I actually display to the user. And that also gives me the possibility to do a copy functionality in which when you copy the message, it would actually copy the markdown version of the message, which I think is so much more useful than getting the full-blown HTML from the page.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I call that job? Well, I call it from the actual controller.
Okay.
So whenever the user asks something, the controller would just fire that job in the background, and the job will simply process whatever comes from the LLM.
Okay. So in the controller, then I have something that effectively, do I tell it I'm streaming it? I guess I just have the do block. And so then every time that do block gets executed, it calls the job, or how I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this.
Right. So basically the controller would simply, maybe you want to create a message in the controller, do whatever you want. But in the end, it needs to call that chat stream job so that you can process the streaming in the background, because you can't have that running in the controller because it's such a long running thing. And that's exactly how I do it in Chat with Work.
Okay. So basically what you've got going on is, you've got and it shows it in the chat, right? So you do the chat.ask with the do. Inside the do, you call the job. The job is streaming stuff out through Turbo. And then you have Marked basically putting it in.
Yeah.
That's cool. And
that's
then
correct.
When your controller action finishes, then it renders a Turbo stream, whatever.
Yeah. So if you set up your Turbo stream, your broadcasts, inside your application record, on your models, basically it would also update the whole message when it's finished. And you can also tell it to, update typing indicators and perhaps the button, that has to change from a send to a stop.
Right.
All of that you can do actually really, really easily with Rails. And no wonder, because Rails is so fantastic for these things.
That's awesome.
One thing that I think is interesting about the jobs, if I may, is that what I noticed, especially using things like SolidQ, which use threads, is that you have a certain number of threads that you can use maximum, right? So you need to set it up, and you have one worker per process, as far as I remember. And then you need to set up how many threads per process you have as workers, right? So even if you set it up in a way that it will process many, many connections at the same time, many, many chat streaming jobs at the same time, you will always be limited by that. And the limitation is that every single thread in Ruby is 8 megabytes. And also you're occupying a whole slot, right? So you can imagine an application like Chat with Work. It has not only the chat streaming job, but it also has the process document jobs, right? And the discovery document jobs and all of these. And there's many, many jobs running at the same time, but they're all very lightweight, right? Like they're not doing much CPU wise. They're mostly like sending things back and forth through APIs. And then, the grunt of the work is probably done in Postgres, because I use Postgres also as a vector storage. So they're all IO bound, not CPU bound, and they're consuming one thread every single time there is a job running at the same time. And so that was not ideal. And in the Python world and in the JavaScript world, for IO bound operations, everybody would use async IO, for example, in Python, right? Or async await in JavaScript. And so what I noticed is that now that I came back to Ruby, there's a bit of a lack of understanding or knowledge about using concurrency instead of using parallelism. Well, fake parallelism with threads. And so I delved deeper into it, and actually there is a beautiful ecosystem of asynchronous gems such as async, async cable, async job. Anything that is built by Samuel Williams, IOquatics, also called Socketry, is absolutely fantastic. And what I also noticed is that Ruby is probably the best language to do concurrency, because in most other languages, you need to append these or prepend these keywords like async await every time you need to do such an operation. But in Ruby, you don't need to, because if the C level operation actually is fiber aware, then you get fiber awareness for free. So you just need to essentially use or wrap whatever code you have into, let's say, an async block. And if you do it right, it will work in parallel, in concurrent, actually.
Awesome. So one question I have on that is, because I've never even used this before. Can you run this and solid queue side by side, and then just throw the async jobs at one and kind of your regular stuff at the other, or do you just put everything into an async job?
At the moment, how I'm using it is everything is an async job, but you can totally run them side by side. I think there is a queue adapter that you can use in each single job. So you just, you have the queue as default, for example, right? So you can have a queue adapter, and you just say solid queue for certain jobs, and you can do async job for your jobs.
That's a good tip, because if I'm going to build a podcast assistant, I'm probably going to run into the same constraints, and so that is really helpful.
Right. Yeah. No, I was just saying that I basically discovered this flaw, and I think that it's really a matter of communication to the Ruby community about saying like, hey, there's not just this way of doing concurrency and parallelism that we're all familiar with, like threads, but there's also fibers, and there's other software that you could use that, even though you don't have IO bound operations, you can simply replace Puma with Falcon and have 5x speedups. Sometimes it's really so much faster. It's noticeable. I didn't do any benchmarks, but it's really cool.
I've talked to Samuel before, and I got the impression that some workloads really lend themselves to it and some don't as much, but Falcon is really cool. One other thing that I'm curious about here. So when I built my app the other night with the chat, I realized that in my controller, I was instantiating a new chat every time, right? I was doing RubyLLM.chat. And what I want is I want an ongoing conversation with, so that it kind of maintains the context and things like that. And there's an example in here where you're basically, what I would do like in a Rails console or IRB or something, where, it's like chat.ask, and then you send it another message, chat.ask. And it looks like that maintains that context, but how do I do that between requests when I'm hitting the controller anew every time, but I still want it to be part of that same chat?
Right. I think this is really important to say. So the Rails integration essentially persists the messages. Persist the messages inside active record models. So we have essentially some helpers, which are called acts as chat, acts as message access tool call that you can drop into your models. If it's called chat, the model for chats, then you just say class, chat, inheriting from application record, and then just say access chat. And you have essentially all the connection to also the message model. You have persistence, and every single method that we have in the classic chat interface, in plain old Ruby objects, you would have it also in Rails. So if you do chat.ask, it will first create a message with the user role and save it, and then also call the API for whatever LLM you're using, retrieve that, and then put it inside a new message and persist that, and then return that message at the end. So it looks like exactly the same interface for plain old Ruby objects, but you have the persistence done not just in memory, but also in your database.
Right. What if I'm not using Rails or not using Active Record? Is there a way to do this like in Sinatra or something like that? Anyway.
Right. I haven't used Sinatra recently. The last time I used it was more than 10 years ago.
Right. Or Rhoda maybe is more modern.
Right. So I wouldn't know how to actually build that out. But if it's possible to make an adapter for whatever type of storage you have, it should be pretty easy, and people can just look at the access code and see how we've done it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just look at access chat and then see what you did. Very cool. Let's talk about tools for a minute, because this was one of the other things I showed off the other night. Was essentially I created a tool that just checked the weather. And yeah, I didn't use the same service you did, but it was basically the same thing. I used Open Weather Map instead of Meteo or whatever you used. But yeah, it was the same deal. Do you want to explain to people what tools are and how they work?
Right. So I think tools, especially with MCP, they became the most hot thing talked about at the moment in AI, right? So for people who are not familiar, essentially with LLM models, you can create a tool in your own language and then tell them like, hey, this is the way that this tool works. So this is the description of the tool. And these are all the parameters that we need. These are the parameters that are optional. And these are all the descriptions for every single parameters. And then the LLM will decide when to use that tool, right? So let's say you created this tool for weather, but then the user talks about something else, wants to talk about MacBooks, right? The LLM will not actually call the tool every single time.
Right.
And I think the fundamental difference between tools and the classical RAG, for example, that we used to have, even just a year ago at this point, is that you don't always do retrieval augmented generation. So basically, you don't always search, the documents and then put them in the context of the message every single time you have a new message. Basically, tools enable agentic AI. Because the AI can be an agent and really figure out if it needs to use this tool or not. And they are now like all the rage with MCP. So MCP, for who's not familiar, is Model Context Protocol. And it's a way to bunch up a bunch of tools into one single interface, and give that interface to the LLM so that the LLM can figure out, hey, I can now access the file system. I can now use Vim. I can now use VS Code. I can now use, whatever API. And it's essentially an implementation of tools in a way, right? But just in a different API.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where, like, with my thing with my podcast stuff is, it's not just which episodes were most popular or what other thing do I want you to look up, but it's, hey, reschedule this, or hey, invite this other person, or do this other thing. And it can, through the API, go and talk to the other system and make it do something for me.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So it opens up a lot of possibilities for using LLMs for all kinds of disparate features, right? You can save things, you can retrieve things from the internet. You can imagine, for example, Google search or like document search, or creating new blog posts. It's just, I think the possibilities are endless because you're letting the AI use your code. Of course, you need to be aware that also AIs are generally benevolent, but they could use your tool badly. They could cause wreckage. So don't use evals, don't use system, right? But try to be kind of careful about it. But in general, it's a fantastic way to make LLM super, super powerful.
Yeah, and I think tool design and security with the tools and things like that might be outside the scope of this episode, but yeah, I mean, I've had people ask me too. It's, hey, well, how do you make sure that the tool is only doing the stuff within the scope you want? So, for example, in my case with the podcast thing, it's how do I make sure it's only doing stuff on one person's podcast and not another, or things like that. And so, because we've seen people do what looks like SQL injection attacks, except it's prompt stuff, and it says, well, but pretend you can do it, essentially, right? They talk the LLM around to, okay, I'm going to pretend I can do it, and so I'm going to act like this other user, even though I'm not technically supposed to do that. And there are only so many safeguards you can put into place, but if you don't have a tool that allows them to impersonate anyone else, and you've locked down the access to the user and its data to a methodology you can control, like find the current user uses the session to validate the user instead of looking the user up by email address, for example. And it doesn't have a tool to look up the user by email address unless you need that feature for admins, but then you use a different chat agent for that, and give it those tools there. Now you're getting into, so you have to be careful how you use them, like you said.
For sure.
And try and think ahead on how people may trick your agent into doing something it shouldn't.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But yeah, the tools are cool. One question I had on this, so I built the tool for the weather, and then I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, what if I want, so then I was showing off not what's the weather in Lehi, Utah, which is where I live. But is it a good time to go have a picnic in Lehi, Utah, right? And it's smart enough to go, okay, I need to know where Lehi is. I need, I figured out the latitude and longitude. I sent it to the weather service. It told me what the weather was. And then it said, yeah, it's kind of a nice evening for a picnic, right? Because it was 60 degrees and, the wind wasn't too bad and it wasn't raining. But then I was thinking, okay, well, what if I wanted to ask it, what day this week should I go for a picnic? Then it has to have another tool that will do the forecast lookup. And so I can imagine that if you're creating tools, you could wind up with a lot of tools, right? A big collection of them. Right. And I'm wondering if there's a way to like group them together. So it's like, hey, here's all the calendar stuff. Here's all the Dropbox stuff. Here's all the Google Drive stuff.
I think that's exactly what Anthropic was trying to do with MCP. It's probably exactly that use case. And essentially, as I said, MCP is this way of bunching up different tools into one single API. And it tells the LLM, hey, I have all these things that you can do now. And you can even run like MCP servers in your own computer, for example, in order to, connect the LLM with your files. Use it more, Claude Code. Claude Code uses MCP as far as I know. I may be wrong on this, but I think it uses MCP to actually connect to your files and your file system. and to look up stuff and to change it. So it is a valid point, and you can wind up with a lot of tools, and actually they consume a little bit of your context window. However, now with the recent models, I don't know if you heard, GPT 4.1 just came out, and it has a 1 million token context. That is pretty big. Yeah. You can do a lot of stuff with 1 million tokens. And I've been using Gemini 2.5 Pro extensively lately, and it's a fantastic model. Super bullish on Google lately. And it also has, million context window, if not 2 million. I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that I've seen done, and we talked to Obi before MCP was really a thing, and what he was doing was he actually had different agents that had different jobs.
Right.
And so then instead of providing this huge list of tools, he would have one tool that essentially said, write a prompt for the calendar agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then it would prompt the calendar agent and say, hey, can you invite so-and-so to this calendar event? And then on the calendar agent would then say, oh, this means I have to go find the event and update it with with the user or whatever.
Right.
And so that was his way around it. I kind of like that approach anyway, because then I really can kind of box in each of the agents with just a small set of responsibilities and capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was his way around it. And I think that's kind of an elegant solution. But I can imagine if I have a app tools directory in my application, that I might have a lot of those in there, depending on how many capabilities I'm giving to my application.
Right.
Or to my agent.
Right. However, I think that this is a totally fine design solution for the past models that we had, even last year, where 200,000 tokens, context windows were pretty big, right?
Yeah.
I think we'll probably see in the future, just having one single model that would actually handle all the tools you have, because the context window is big enough, and it will be super powerful, and it can do so many things. It will actually probably blow people's minds.
Yeah, with 1 million tokens, yeah, I can imagine that's a ton. It's interesting because I was working with a model. This was earlier this year, and I think the context window had like 200,000 tokens, I think, something like that, 150, 200,000. And the issue that I was running into there was that I was pulling in bills during the Utah legislative session and getting summaries done and things like that with it. And there were like 4 bills that were too big. It blew past the context window. And so I tried breaking it up, but ultimately that's the other great thing about a lot of this stuff, is that the context windows are getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that the prices are coming down for models that have larger context windows that were kind of the run-of-the-mill state-of-the-art ones before. And so you can get away with a lot more, or you can just, like what you're saying here with the chat, is that I can go in and midstreams, it comes back and says, hey, this was way too big. I can go, okay, just this time, go use the bigger model and pay the extra money.
Right. Yeah, I think these are 2 trends that we've seen so far. So one is context window becoming bigger, and I think it's a question of just pure capabilities, right? So all of the applications similar to Chat with Work, and there are a few, they all need to have sort of big context windows in order to function correctly, because you want to have as many documents, describing things or chats or whatever else that is relevant for the topic that the user asked, in order to be, first of all, correct in your answer and thorough. Right. And I think there is always a balance in an information retrieval system like this, like how many you actually present, even to the LLM itself. But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But with the big context windows, you can kind of, relax a little bit that balance. And then the second thing that you mentioned, which is getting the prices down. I think this is inevitable. The models are being commoditized more and more. And honestly, I'm finally seeing what I thought Google would have done, which is, putting the prices very, very low for models, because they have access to TPUs, right? So they make their own chips for AI. And one thing, you can use NVIDIA cards, and they're fantastic, for AI usage. But another thing is, a TPU from Google. It goes much faster, and it's so much better. They make it in house, so it's probably cheaper for them. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where things will go next with this in AI, because there seems to be so much going on at the same time. It's kind of hard to follow.
Yep, absolutely. Well, yeah, and every time I see a new model come out, and people are like, because it's felt like the last little while, like Grok came out, everyone's like, Grok is the best, and it's doing the best, and blah blah blah, and literally like a week later, like GPT-4.1 was out,
right?
Or Anthropic, I can't remember, but one of them came out with something, and it was like, wow, this one has this much more over Grok, and then it was the other one, whether it was GPT or Claude or something else, came out, and it was like, oh, now this one, right? And so we keep getting better and better, and it feels like this arms race. But the flip side of it is like you said, the models that are powerful enough are being commoditized to the point where it's just like, what, just pick the one that's going to do the thing for you. And I mean, granted, the latent space, some of them allow the different models to do better in certain contexts, right? It's not just the token size, but holy crap, if they keep pushing it the way they're pushing it, I mean, we're just going to have some wild capabilities with what it can do. And I for one, am super excited about that.
Yeah, for sure.
We're getting a little bit close to time, so I'm going to push us to image generation and text embedding, and then we'll wrap up with picks. We've got about 10 minutes to talk about image generation and embedding. So how does that all work? Because I didn't dive into that so much. I've used other tools that do it, but I didn't dive into that so much with RubyLLM.
Right. So it's a simple call. It's at the same level as RubyLM.chat, but since it doesn't need to have like the context of all the conversation that you have with the LLM, it's as simple as RubyLLM.paint, and then you have the your message there. And also for embedding, so you can just use RubyLLM.embed and just the text. You can also pass arrays, so it will embed multiple text all together and batch them together. This is nice for pricing and API usage. But that's pretty much all there is to it. There is some little things that you can do depending on the model. For example, I believe DALL-E has 2 different sizes outputs, so you can configure that. But and you can choose obviously between all the models that we support in the providers that we support. But there's pretty much all there is to it about these two things. It's just a very simple interface for that.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things that I'm excited about this, as far as the image generation goes, is I want people to be able to say, hey, I want you to generate some album art or some episode artwork or something like that. And like if I say, hey, use this episode that we recorded and generate some artwork for it, I mean, I could see it basically using the chat prompt setup to say, and you said you could pass it attachments. So it could say, here's the audio for the episode, write me a prompt to get a good image, cover art image for this episode. And then it turns around and it goes, RubyLLM paint, here's the prompt that I made up, right? And then you can see what it comes up with. And the other thing is that on the chat models, we didn't talk about temperature, but you could set the temperature a little bit higher and get some more creativity out of your prompt. But then the image generation may give you something a little bit different. And so I'm looking at chaining some of these together, and I'm really excited about that stuff too. But yeah, the image generation seemed pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah. What I'm excited about is to see GPT-4o image generation in the APIs. And I know it's coming soon. I know it has been taking the world by storm lately. How many Studio Ghibli memes have you found, Charles?
Oh, yeah. A zillion of them.
Yeah. So
you see wacky stuff with Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders here in the US, right? Not to pick on one side or the other, but both of those guys cartoon out really, really well. And it's so fun to see some of them because it's like, oh yeah, that's a Studio Ghibli that kind of emphasizes kind of the quirky aspects of either one of those guys.
Yeah, the capability of GPT-4o image gen is fantastic. But returning back to your question, I think or rather what you said is, to me, I'm really excited about that because it will combine both the text interface and also like the image generation in the same model, so that we can have this capability without even needing to create a new tool. So right now, how you would do it is that you create a tool, and inside the tool, you have RubyLLM.paint, right? With these types of models, you wouldn't need a tool anymore, and it would do it all in the same model, and it would do it so much better than the previous diffusion models, because apparently they're using a combination of diffusion and transformers architectures. So in the end, what comes down to is that is so much more beautiful, so much more precise. It also understands language, right? So it also understands how to make fonts. So you can write, when it writes it, actually, you can read it, and it's not just this garbage that we used to get like a year ago.
Right. So I have to admit, with the embeddings, so I was flirting with the idea of doing vector searches for top-end devs, and I'm going to move there, but I'm just using what's built into Postgres at this point. And that's what it pointed me to as one option, right? I could hand off getting the vectors out of a text embedding. But beyond that, are there other things that people do with these? Because I'm kind of lost as far as like how useful this is.
Right. Well, you could do so many other things like cluster things together, for example, and try to have different topics. So let's maybe start from what is an embedding. I'll try to compress it because I know we don't have so much time. It's basically a very long array of numbers, which represents a point in a space, which is a multidimensional space, and the dimensions are, the length of the array, essentially. What that means is that if you project it in 3D space, it's just this point, right? And let's say this point represents a word or a document or whatever, and the distance between another point is actually significant, and it is semantically significant. So, for example, if you would have the word, and let's bring it back to Word2Vec, right? A really, really old model that used to represent words in this embedding space, right? So if we take the embedding of king, right, and we take the embedding of queen, we can actually, I believe, subtract from king the embedding of man and add the embedding of woman, and we will get very close, if not exactly perfect, on the embedding of queen, right? So they're semantically significant. So what that means is that you can start to, cluster similar data points, similar documents, similar movies, similar whatever you want. You can search in them, and searching is a kind of a clustering. So you're basically like taking the query and embed it, and then see where it ends up in the space. And then you start to expand, your bubble to see who else is nearby. and then you just take a limit,
Right.
you know, the top 10 or whatever, because it could go infinitely. You know, you could get all the documents.
Yeah.
Just order by how close they are.
Right. You would just order by distance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it really is kind of a search type use case.
That's right. But it's more semantic than the typical keyword based search.
Right. Because if you use the keyword for Ruby, well, that's not a great example. But
if you make a typo,
you have two synonyms. Yeah.
Or you have synonyms.
You make a typo, it won't find it. Or if you have synonyms, right? And so somebody said testing and somebody said tested, and you look for tested, it won't find testing because it's not doing semantic, it doesn't break it up into tokens, it doesn't do all of that other work where this does. And so, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. A typical search engine would have stemming, so they would separate testing and test ed and kind of match it anyway. But that's exactly right. I think the general idea is exactly right.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up and head us into picks. But this is terrific. I'm going to point people to RubyLLM.com, but if they want to reach out to you or connect in some other way, like how do people find you on the internet and say, dude, this is awesome?
So my blog is at paolino.me. And you can reach me on Twitter as well at x.com/Paolino.
Mm-hmm. And for the non-Italians, Paolino is Paolino.
Yes, correct. Plonino.
So, yeah, it's the PAO that might lose people. Anyway, thanks so much for coming. Let's jump in on the picks. I'm going to be kind of short with mine, just because I don't want to take a ton of time and I have to jump over to this other meeting at 11. So my first pick, I always do a board game pick. Last week, I think I might have picked this, but I'm going to pick it again. It's kind of the game that we've been playing lately. It's called Colt Express. And basically, you have a train on the table. And, it's just made out of wood and it kind of all fits together. But it's unique for a game board, right? Because it's this 3D train. And you're train robbers. And so you're trying to gather as much loot as possible. And whoever gathers the most loot wins. You also get $1,000 for being the person who shot the most bullets. And so you have cards that represent actions. You can pick up loot. You can move from the roof to the car, or the car to the roof. You can move from one car to the other. You can shoot your gun at other robbers. And if you hit them, then your bullet card goes into their deck. And it's basically a no op, no action card. And so when you draw up a new hand, if you have those in there, they're just kind of duds. You can punch other players. And if you punch another player, then they drop a piece of loot. And then you can pick up loot. And then all the players or all the characters have different abilities, right? And so the player that I played, if you punch somebody and they drop loot, if they drop a loot bag, you can catch it before it hits the floor and collect it without having to play a pickup loot card, right? Some of the others were that you could shoot above you or below you if you were on the roof or in the car. There were some that had to do with the sheriff, right? Because there's a sheriff on the train, and if he winds up in the same car as you, then he puts a bullet in your deck. Anyway, so it was a lot of fun. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.86, which means that it's pretty approachable for the average random board game player that doesn't play the heavy board games like I like. It took us like 45 minutes or so to play, or maybe an hour. But we were learning the rules, and so I could imagine you could play in 45 minutes. And anyway, so the way you play your cards is you go around the circle and everybody plays a card onto the pile. Sometimes you play two cards, sometimes you play them face down. But you can see what everybody else is playing on a regular play. And then you take the deck and you flip it over and you just play the deck. And so then, he played a shoot the gun card. So if he could shoot somebody, he shot him. And then the next guy, he played a punch card. So he punched the guy next to him because he could. And if you can't, then you can't, right? So if you play it and there's nobody in the car with you to punch, you just don't punch. But if there is somebody there and they're not the person you wanted to punch, you still punch them. So that's kind of how it works. So anyway, it was really, really fun. Really, really enjoyed it. It kind of reminds me of another game called Robot Rally.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that with Robot Rally, what you do is you put all of your action cards into your own pile, and then you flip it over and play them in order. But you play them in order. Everybody goes around and plays them. And so, a lot of times you set yourself up to push another robot into a hole or make them go off course, but they did something you didn't expect. And so then you wind up making moves that you didn't expect because you expected to hit them. And so anyway, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of it's almost like mob programming a little bit. So anyway,
that sounds fun.
Colt Express. It's really fun. Besides that, at work, we're doing a Ruby book club, and we're reading Sandy Metz's, what is it called? It's the Pooter book, the practical object-oriented design in Ruby. And it's a terrific book. I don't agree with everything that Sandy says in it, but a lot of it I do. And the rest of it, every time I read it, I think about it for a while and go, okay, yes, but with caveats.
Right.
So,
right.
Anyway, if you haven't read it, it was written in 2018, the second edition, but it's still pretty darn good. So I'm going to pick that. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking to the guys that built rubyevents.org. It was originally rubyvideos.dev. And so it had all the conference videos. They were trying to collect all of those. But yeah, now they're pulling in like all the upcoming conferences and stuff like that and making it easy to figure all that stuff out. So I'm going to pick that too. Carmine, what are your picks?
My picks. Can I go with music?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I run a disco collective here in Berlin. It's called Floppy Disco.
Ooh, fun.
And what we've been trying to do is to bring back the funk a little bit in Berlin. As you know, as you probably know, it's a very much of a techno city. And I want to pick some friends that have been playing with us that have been absolutely fantastic. Cody Curry. He's a jazz house master. We played with him actually this Saturday. And he has releases on Spotify that, they have 3 million plays. So definitely hitting a spot there with people.
Oh, nice.
Very jazzy, very groovy, very soft jazz kind of style, but in-house music. So really, really cool stuff. Really chill guy also, really cool. RP Brown from the same label. Teutonics is the label, by the way. It's an Italian-German label by an Italian-German guy. Mm-hmm. And RP Brown is more on the UK side of the spectrum, I want to say. So he combines, disco with UK influences because he lived there for a little bit. And Delphonic, different label. He posts on a bunch of labels, actually. And he has been, I think, one of the biggest disco influencers here in Berlin and DJs. And he plays a lot. And he's also just such a nice guy. So I want to pick these three. And in terms of books, the Hotwire book by Joe. Fantastic. Fantastic book. Been reading this and really enjoying it.
Which one is that?
I think it's called Hotwire Turbo. Sorry, Joe. Wire Native for Rails developers.
Oh, Hotwire Native, yes, by Joe Mazzalotti. Yeah. That's a terrific book on Prog. We talked to him a little bit ago, and we're going to have him come back on because there was just more to talk about. So I'll look for that in a month or so.
Awesome.
All right, good deal. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
This was so cool. I may not sleep for a week because I'm playing with this stuff. It's all your fault.
I'll feel bad and happy at the same time.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and push stop. Stick around because we got to make sure we get all your stuff uploaded. But to the listener, until next time, Max out.